It was 2:17 p.m. when the lawyer's words made the conference room temperature seem to drop 20 degrees. And to my grandchildren, who couldn't find time to visit me in my final 3 years, I leave each of you exactly $1. The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear the antique wall clock ticking. But the worst part wasn't the single dollar. It was what came next. However, the bulk of my $12 million estate will go to... The lawyer paused, looking up from the document with something that might have been a smile. Let me take you back 18 months earlier to a sprawling Victorian house on Maple Street, where everything still seemed perfectly normal. Eleanor and Frank Harrison had built their fortune the old-fashioned way. 43 years of running a successful manufacturing business, living modestly, investing wisely. The kind of grandparents who still used coupons and fixed things with duct tape, even though they had millions in the bank. Their kitchen always smelled like cinnamon and coffee. The kind of place where the cookie jar was never empty, and the welcome mat actually meant something. They had 5 grandchildren, all adults now, all busy with their important lives in the city, each one convinced they'd be first in line when the inheritance came. There was Brittany, 34, the corporate lawyer who sent birthday cards but never visited. Her signature was always rushed, printed by an assistant she'd never admit she had. Monica, 31, the real estate developer, would call every few months, always on speakerphone, always with that hollow tone that said she was multitasking, checking emails while pretending to care about her grandfather's garden updates. Stella, 29, the social media influencer with 800,000 followers. She'd posted exactly 3 photos with her grandparents in 5 years, each one perfectly filtered, captioned with borrowed inspirational quotes about family. The comments section loved her. Eleanor and Frank rarely appeared in her life outside those curated moments. Then there was Wendy, 26, the investment banker who worked 80-hour weeks and considered family obligations a quarterly checkbox. She'd Venmo money for birthdays, as if affection could be automated. And finally, Crystal, 24, the youngest, who'd inherited the family's business sense but none of their warmth. She'd already started asking about estate planning when she was 22. Subtle questions, casual mentions, always wrapped in concern about making sure everything was organized for their peace of mind. The shift happened on a Sunday afternoon in October. Eleanor was 79. Frank had just turned 82. They sat at their kitchen table, the one they'd eaten at for 43 years, surrounded by silence that felt heavier than usual. "Did you notice the date?" Eleanor asked quietly, her finger tracing the calendar square. Frank nodded. He'd noticed. It was their 60th wedding anniversary. The phone hadn't rung once. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. Not from age, from something else. Something that had been building for 3 years, since the visits became excuses, since the calls became obligations, since their grandchildren's love became something that existed only in past tense. "I got a text from Brittany," Frank said, holding up his phone. The screen showed a generic animated greeting card, the kind you send in 12 seconds. "She's thinking of us." Thinking of them. From 200 miles away, where she'd been for 3 birthdays, 2 Thanksgivings, and 1 Christmas. Eleanor opened her laptop. Her hands might have trembled, but her expression was steel. "Remember that attorney we met at the Reynolds anniversary party? The one who specializes in creative estate planning?" Frank looked at his wife of 60 years, saw something in her eyes he recognized. The same determination she'd had when they'd started their business with $3,000 and a dream. The same fire she'd had when doctors said she couldn't have children and they'd proved them wrong. "What are you thinking?" he asked, though he could already see the answer forming. Eleanor pulled up a document, started typing. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, deliberately, "that it's time we taught our grandchildren what we actually value. And it isn't money." Over the next 17 days, Eleanor and Frank crafted something extraordinary. Not just a will, a masterpiece of poetic justice. They documented everything: the 62 missed visits, the 38 declined invitations, the 24 times they'd been promised a visit soon that never came, the 11 family gatherings their grandchildren were too busy to attend. Frank, with his methodical engineering mind, created a spreadsheet: dates, times, excuses given. A pattern so clear it was damning. But the genius wasn't in the documentation, it was in what came next. Eleanor called a family meeting, the first one in 4 years that all 5 grandchildren would attend. The bait? A casual mention that they were updating the estate plan and wanted everyone's input. Suddenly, schedules cleared. Brittany rearranged a court date. Monica postponed a property closing. Stella canceled a brand partnership meeting. Wendy left the office before midnight for the first time in months. Crystal arrived 30 minutes early. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Saturday. Eleanor made sure to mention she'd be serving her famous pot roast, the one the grandchildren used to beg for. That Saturday, the house came alive in a way it hadn't for years. All 5 grandchildren arrived with suspiciously perfect timing. 15 minutes early. Dressed well, phones mostly silenced. They hugged their grandparents. The kind of hugs that last exactly 2.3 seconds. Calculated affection. "Grandma, you look wonderful," Brittany said, her lawyer voice smooth as silk. "The house looks amazing," Monica added, already mentally appraising the real estate value. Stella was taking photos. "For memories," she said, though everyone knew. They'd go on Instagram within the hour. Frank served the pot roast. Eleanor watched them eat, really eat, the food they'd been too busy to enjoy for years. Watched them laugh at old stories they'd forgotten. Watched them pretend this was normal. This was who they were. After dinner, they gathered in the living room. 5 grandchildren, 2 elderly grandparents, and the family lawyer they'd flown in from the city. "Before we discuss the estate," Eleanor said, her voice steady, "I want to tell you all something." The room leaned forward, collective attention sharp as knives. "Your grandfather and I have been keeping track of something. Call it a hobby in our retirement." She pulled out a leather-bound journal, worn edges, obviously well used. "We've been documenting every promise made and broken. Every visit was canceled. Every excuse given. Every moment we waited by the window for grandchildren who never came." The temperature in the room shifted. Suddenly, the pot roast felt heavy in 5 stomachs. "Grandma, I can explain," Brittany started. Eleanor held up a hand, gentle but firm. The same hand that had built a business, raised children, and now held all the cards. "We're not looking for explanations, dear. We understand. You're all very busy, very successful. We're proud of what you've accomplished." Frank stood, joints creaking slightly. At 82, every movement was deliberate. "What your grandmother and I realized," he said, walking to the mantel where old family photos gathered dust, "is that we'd been thinking about inheritance all wrong." He picked up a photo. 5 small children, gap-toothed and muddy, laughing in a sprinkler. Summer of 1998, back when love wasn't transactional. "We thought we'd leave you money because we love you. But we realized something. Money isn't an expression of love. Time is. Presence is. Showing up is." Monica's designer heels clicked as she shifted uncomfortably. "We've always loved you both. Work has been an excuse," Eleanor interrupted softly. "And we've decided to leave our estate to people who understand what actually matters." You could have heard a pin drop in that antique-filled living room. Crystal, the youngest, finally broke. Are you saying you're cutting us out?" Eleanor smiled. It wasn't cruel. It was sad. No, darling. We're leaving you exactly what you've given us. Let me explain. The lawyer, a woman named Ruth, who'd been practicing estate law for 37 years, opened her briefcase. She'd seen a lot in her career, but this case was special. Your grandparents, she began, pulling out documents, have structured their estate in a rather unique way. One I've never quite seen executed with such precision. She laid out the first document, a detailed log. Over the past 3 years, Eleanor and Frank documented every interaction with each of you. Phone calls, texts, visits, invitations extended and declined. She produced a chart, color-coded, brutally factual. Brittany, in 3 years, you visited 4 times. Each visit lasted an average of 42 minutes. You canceled 11 planned visits. Brittany's face went pale under her expensive makeup. Monica, 3 visits. Average duration, 37 minutes. You canceled 14 plans, usually via text message, often while the meal was already cooking. Monica stared at the table. Stella, 5 visits, though your social media would suggest more. The photos you posted were from exactly 5 occasions spread across 3 years. You promised to visit 23 times. Stella's phone, for once, lay silent in her lap. Wendy, 2 visits, both because you needed signatures on documents. You sent 47 texts over 3 years. 39 of them were holiday greetings. Wendy's investment banker composure cracked. And Crystal, 6 visits, the highest number. But Ruth paused. Your grandfather noted that 5 of those visits included questions about their estate planning, asset allocation, or financial situation. Crystal's jaw tightened. Ruth pulled out another document. This one is thicker. In the same 3 years, Eleanor and Frank invited each of you to 37 family occasions. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, Sunday dinners. You collectively attended 9. That's a 24% attendance rate. The math was brutal, undeniable. Frank stood again, this time moving to the window. Outside, the garden he'd maintained for 40 years bloomed in the late afternoon sun. The garden none of his grandchildren had walked through in years. We realized something, he said, his back to the room. We'd become an obligation, a duty, a checkbox on your list of things that made you good people. He turned around. His eyes, still sharp at 82, looked at each grandchild. But here's what you didn't know. While you were all busy, we were living. Really living. Eleanor pulled out her phone, scrolled through photos. This is Community Center, 3 blocks away. We've been volunteering there for 2 years, teaching financial literacy to single parents. She swiped. Another photo. This is Gabrielle. She's 19, working 2 jobs, raising her baby sister after their mother passed. We've been mentoring her. She visits every Tuesday for dinner, never misses, never cancel. Another photo. This is Paolo, first-generation college student. We helped him with his business plan. He calls us every Sunday, just to talk, just to say hello. Photo after photo, each one showing Eleanor and Frank surrounded by people, laughing, present, alive. These people, Frank said quietly, showed up. When we were in the hospital last year... You were in the hospital? Brittany interrupted, horror in her voice. Eleanor nodded. Frank had pneumonia, spent 8 days in intensive care. We texted all of you, got 5 "feel better soon" responses. No visits. You were all too busy. She swiped to another photo, hospital room, but it wasn't empty. Gabrielle sat with me for 2 days. Paolo organized a meal train. The community center folks came by in shifts to keep me company. People we'd known for 2 years showed more love than grandchildren we'd known for decades. The silence in the room was suffocating. Ruth cleared her throat. Time for the final revelation. Eleanor and Frank have divided their $12 million estate as follows. Each grandchild receives $1, a token to maintain legal validity. The remainder is split between a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, the community center, and direct support for the 17 individuals who showed up consistently in their final years. She paused, letting it sink in. Gabrielle, the young woman working 2 jobs, will have her college fully paid for and receive $50,000 annually for 5 years. Paolo's business will receive $200,000 in seed funding. Every person who visits regularly receives a stipend of $25,000. The numbers landed like physical blows. The remaining $8 million funds the Show Up Scholarship for students who demonstrate exceptional care for elderly community members. Your grandparents will impact hundreds of lives. They just won't be yours. Crystal was the first to cry. Real tears, not performative ones. We didn't realize. Eleanor's expression softened slightly, just slightly. That's exactly the problem, darling. You didn't realize. Didn't realize that your grandfather spent every Sunday for 3 years calling each of you, hoping someone would answer. Didn't realize I made your favorite cookies 17 times, hoping you'd stop by. Didn't realize that love isn't something you inherit, it's something you practice. Frank sat down heavily in his worn leather chair, the one he'd sit in reading to his grandchildren 20 years ago. We don't hate you, he said tiredly. We love you. That's why this hurts. That's why we're doing this. Money you didn't earn teaches you nothing. But consequences? Consequences are the final lesson we can give you. Eleanor closed her journal. 3 years of documentation. 3 years of hope fading into acceptance. You each receive $1. What you do with the lesson is up to you. You can dismiss it, justify your behavior, and blame us for being old-fashioned. Or you can learn that some things, time, presence, love, can't be replicated or delegated or scheduled for later. She stood, smoothed her dress. Dinner's over. The will is filed. You're all welcome to visit any time. The door is always open. The cookies are always fresh. But we won't hold our breath. Ruth gathered her documents. The meeting was over. One by one, the grandchildren left. Some are angry. Some were crying. All understanding, perhaps for the first time, that they'd gambled on their grandparents' love lasting forever. And lost. 6 months later, something unexpected happened. Brittany showed up on a Tuesday evening. No call, no text. Just knocked on the door holding grocery bags. I thought, she said, voice shaking slightly, I could make dinner for you tonight, if you'll let me. Eleanor looked at her oldest grandchild, saw something different, something real. The kitchen's open, she said. One visit didn't erase 3 years. One dinner didn't undo the damage. But it was a start. Over the next months, something shifted. Not with all of them. Crystal sent a bitter email and never contacted them again. Monica and Wendy sent obligatory holiday cards. Nothing more. But Brittany came every Tuesday. Stella started calling on Sundays. Really talking. Phone away. Present in the conversation. They'd learned what Eleanor and Frank had known all along. Inheritance isn't money. It's time. It's presence. It's showing up when it matters and staying even when it's inconvenient. The $12 million changed hundreds of lives through scholarships and support. But the real inheritance, the lesson in what actually matters, that was priceless. Eleanor and Frank, in their 80s, had pulled off the most brilliant revenge of all. teaching their grandchildren that love can't be inherited. It has to be earned, every single day. And sometimes, the best last laugh is the one that finally teaches the lesson that should have been learned all along.